good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. As mentioned, welcome. Welcome to this week's IFA Global Café. My name is Roxana, and I'm very excited to be moderating today's discussion with Ryan Backer on the topic of the power of conversation to dismantle ageism. So as background, Ryan is an age activist. He's also the co-creator of the Old School Anti-Ageism Clearinghouse. Ryan has experience in facilitating workshops on aging, and undoing ageism internationally. They have also worked as an in-home care partner. Ryan does care work, organizes inter-age events and groups, writes signs, and sits on the board of 2 community-based nonprofits in Montreal, Canada. Academically, Ryan has also have an undergraduate degree in gerontology with a minor in Black Studies from the University of New York. We're very excited to have you with us today, Ryan, and thank you very much for your time. And I'm sure your experiences, achievements, and background will really catalyze just a great discussion on the power of conversation and dialogue to dismantle ageism. So thank you. And to start things off, Ryan, maybe you can share with us all a little bit more about Old School Anti-Ageism Clearinghouse. So what is it, and how does this platform achieve and exemplify the role of conversation as a powerful tool for exploring the universal yet unique experiences of aging?
Sure. Thanks so much, Roxana. So hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. It's an honor. I love this series. Old School, for those of you who don't know about it yet, hopefully some of you do. But Old School, as you can see from my background, is an anti-ageism clearinghouse. We started off simply as a spreadsheet of, I think at the time it was 74 different resources that we were compiling in 2018. We started the project at the end of 2017. So all throughout early 2018, we were putting together all of these resources and anything we could find on the web that educated people about ageism. So any sort of resources. So we came across books, we came across some blogs that talked about ageism, mostly blog posts, a lot of articles. We had some videos that we had on the list, but it was 74 resources. So it wasn't that big of a deal, but we thought, okay, we have this spreadsheet, so why don't we make it into something that's a bit more interesting? So we made it into a web page. And when we launched it, that the response was really what made us realize that this was something that was so needed. And, you know, a lot of that did have to do with conversation. We weren't talking about ageism as much back then. It wasn't on people's radars as much as it is now, luckily. And so it's grown and grown and grown because of that. So it's now basically a library of 400, over 400 resources from all around the web. We have books, reports, blogs, papers, tools, podcasts is a new one, campaigns is a new one that we've added since we've started for the categories. So we really, we have all sorts of we have poems, we have really amazing older videos from the 80s with Maggie Kuhn talking about ageism. We just have a real array of different resources that, people can use to self-educate, but also people do use as teaching tools for anything really to get people interested in uncovering the harms of ageism. And in the context of conversation, when COVID first started and we all started meeting on Zoom, and it was obvious that, even though we were going through such a tough time, there was a real opportunity for people to really connect, across so many different places, across so many different fields. And at Old School, we thought, well, let's use that to our advantage. We had just put on this new section, the campaign section, and we realized, it would be cool. We are connected to all of these people behind all the campaigns, but I don't know if they know each other. So we thought, why don't we bring together all of the folks behind the campaigns in our campaign section and just have a Zoom call and just chat and see, how their experiences relate. And the thing that we learned from that was just so exciting was that people were so excited to talk about this work of undoing ageism together. And it was so fascinating because they were just so grateful. It felt like, at that time we were just so isolated from COVID. And in a lot of ways, undoing ageism is isolating work just because it's not a conversation that everyone's having. A lot of people, when I tell them the work I do, they get a bit confused and they don't really understand. A lot of people just think that I am a care worker, that I just work with older people. But I think the work to undo ageism is much more than that. It's working with people of all ages to look at this form of discrimination. So that kind of snowballed into, we realized, oh, this is something that we need to keep on doing. So we started to have a quarterly convening where we just brought together anyone really who wanted to show up. We told our fan base, we told the creators of the resources that we had on our site, we put it on social media, and it was just a way for anyone to come together and talk about ageism. To learn about ageism, we would have presenters, we would present some of the stuff that we were working on. And my colleague Kyrie is really good at creating really great containers for learning and exploring ideas together. So we had impromptu networking, which was really fun, which, people just came to network, really, that they loved it, just to connect in that way. And then we would also do activities where we would discover together as a group how ageism is showing up for all of us, and how the different tactics that are used to combat it from all the different places. And it was a very international gathering. And then now I'll do a little promo for the weekly office hours that we have. So every Wednesday at 1:30 Eastern time, we have people who come from all over the world. We have some regulars. I see some here. I'm so happy to say that. And, we just get together and we have a conversation. It's very casual. We do have a lot of people who keep coming back. We have people who can show up, when they're able to. Maybe their schedule doesn't allow it all the time, but they pop in. You don't have to be there for the whole hour. You can come early, leave late, whatever your schedule allows. And then we have some really great people who, they come in and they just show up just because they want to talk about ageism. We have caregivers, we have students, we have folks who are really there to learn about the work that we do when it comes to dismantling ageism and the different options that there are. And some people just show up and they just listen. They use us as a podcast, and that's really cool too. And some people can't even help but jump in. They think they're there just to listen, and then they come up with an idea, or they come up with a question, and they come on and talk about it.
No, listen, thank you so much for sharing that with us all today, Ryan. And just in terms of impacts, can you talk to us a little bit more about the impacts of ageism on older adults and how ageism can impact the health and psychological well-being among many?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think it's still being uncovered just how much of an impact ageism has on older people specifically. And, Becca Levy's research into this is so important, where she figured out that, basically people who have a more realistic view of aging live 7.5 years longer. And unfortunately, people who have this self-directed ageism, which in my opinion is really such a horrible aspect of this topic, they live 7.5 years less. So it really does have so many psychological and physical implications for us. I think, and I say for us because I do believe that ageism affects people of all ages. I don't think it's just something that affects older people, but I can get into that a bit more later. But I think for older people specifically, I mean, this is just from what I've learned. As you can tell, I'm not an older person myself, but from what I hear, it really causes a lot of isolation. And I know that because of the segregation that's in our current society. So there's a lot of isolation. I think it affects something as simple as self-esteem. I see this amongst my friends, I see this amongst loved ones. Um, it can really affect the way that we feel about ourselves. And it's not just when we look in the mirror, but it's really worrying about how people perceive us when we go out into the world. I mean, the term invisibilizing, especially for women, I think is also such an important topic to bring up when we talk about this topic, because it's just such a truth for so many people that I don't think it is talked about enough. So there's that. There's then you kind of take a step back and you think about systemic ageism and how that shows up, and it's this whole other level of who was being seen in the triage, for triage for during COVID, for in the worst times of COVID, who there's this real issue with conservatorships, and guardianships, I guess they're called. Like, this is a huge topic that I don't think gets talked about enough, and it really can affect people. There's, of course, I don't want to say that, the whole uh aging industrial complex, as I like to call it, uh, is ageist, but I think there's just a lot of ageism embedded in it, and it shows up in some pretty serious ways when we're talking about the lives of older people. And yeah, that's just a few. But like I said, I do think it affects everyone, and I think something that I talk a lot about in my work, and I especially enjoy talking to younger people about this, is how ageism affects younger people, but I'm not necessarily talking about ageism against younger people, although I think that is a very important topic and also something that's not talked about enough. But the thing that I like to talk about is how ageism against older people still affects younger people. Not just in the fact that, for instance, I'll just give myself as an example. When I was younger, I had the opportunity to spend time with my grandparents. And looking back, I realized that I often chose not to. And I 100% believe that that is because of ageism, because of the world that the world that we live in, where we're the dominant world that I live in, I should say, like the dominant culture that devalues older people, and that puts a very uncomfortable value on younger people. You could even say, in some ways, we live in a youth supremacy, but at the same time, we also live in an adult supremacy. So it's very confusing when it comes to age and ageism, because there's no easy distinction between those two words. It is a gradient, um, and it's or a spectrum, or however you want to look at it. So it can get confusing when we're talking about how ageism affects us. But I really do believe that it's important to talk about the fact that we all have an age. And we all interact with people who have ages, and that really plays into so much of our culture, but we don't talk about it enough.
Thank you very much. And I'm also curious about how can an intersectionality how can intersectionality essentially impact the experiences of aging? How would you say, and how can we work to undo ageism within an intersectional framework as a whole?
Thank you so much for this question. I think intersectionality is such an important topic that isn't talked about in spaces like this enough. The simple way that I like to talk about intersectionality is to just go back to the beginning and talk about how it was coined. So Kimberly Crenshaw is a lawyer, is an academic, is an incredible activist. And I think in the 80s, she really wanted to come up with a term that could explain her unique experience as a Black woman, in the sense that she experienced being a woman differently than white women because of her identity as a Black person. And she experienced being Black differently than Black men, specifically because of her experience as a woman. So that's the origins of the word, and it's become, of course, I hope, I hope that we can at least have the willingness to hear about this word. I think it can sort of dwindle into arguments about identity politics and all that. But I think it's really just, when you think about it in that context, it's really just a way to put language to experiences that we're all already having already. So when it comes to intersectionality, it's really all about just shedding a light on something that already exists. It's the truth of our lives that we're talking about, and the truth of our experiences as different people. The thing that I love about intersectionality is just that it really, in a way, celebrates diversity. That I think for so long we haven't really celebrated diversity, in the sense that, specifically, like, let's say we're talking about the aging space. Who has the mic in this space? Who gets to take the platforms and talk about aging? Who gets to, make the policies? Oftentimes it's younger people. That's, one of the reasons I sometimes hesitate to associate myself with gerontology, because I think it's an interesting field where, the folks who are, making the policies and making the decisions, are oftentimes younger people. And I see this even in my community in Montreal, where a lot of the services, a lot of the programming is hopefully informed by older people, but it's oftentimes given by younger people. So I find that really important to talk about. But then when we're just talking about intersectionality and aging, I think it's also vital to say that people who have experienced depression all of their lives, aging it's just harder. We all know, I mean, I think a big reason why we're here is because we can see the challenges that aging presents. But when you have an experience of oppression, at any level, as you get older, you realize, oh, this is even harder. Even just talking about life expectancy, I think is really important on this topic, because people. It's I say this kind of bluntly, but some people don't even have the privilege of experiencing ageism, because they don't have the privilege of getting to an older age. So I think that also factors into it. And then the last thing I'll say on this topic is just that it's also really interesting to think about, people who have more privilege when we're talking about intersectionality. And I honestly think that's an important reason, or a reason why, it's taken this long. It was coined in the 80s, but it's taken us this long to have conversations around intersectionality, because of who has been in control of those conversations. So as we see the culture change around who shows up, who's showing up, who's being recognized, um, it starts to change the conversation, which I think is so important. And for, people who have more privilege, who are white, who are male, who are well off, who are higher class, I mean, um, who, do not have a disability, when they experience ageism, they understand. They might not understand what it's like to be someone who has a different identity from them, but they understand what it's like to feel oppression in a way that they have never felt it before. So I also think that it's really important when I have these conversations. I want to invite everyone to the table. I think it's so important, or go to other people's tables, to use that metaphor, and talk about this topic, because I think it's something that everyone can relate to in one way or another.
No, thanks so much, Ryan, for that very comprehensive answer. And just moving along to the chat for a little bit as well. Just thank you, Kathleen Klein, for all the resources you've put in. But we also do have a question from one of our regular participants, Mr. Shmuel Yerushalmi. And I encourage folks to type comments and questions as well. But Shmuel has asked what role can the community play in building environments that support effective conversations to dismantle ageism?
I love this question. My favorite hack for this is you literally don't need to do anything other than notice when you're in spaces where there's people of multiple ages. So when there's what I like to call a mixed age group, when you have a lot of older people and younger people, and hopefully people in the middle too, just say it. You can just say, wow, there's a lot of different ages in this group. I think it's so simple, but it's so powerful, because we very rarely talk about age when it comes to diversity. And to just step back a little bit, the reason why I think that's so important is to talk about, the different ages in the room, because we know from, the World Health Organization's global report on ageism, and even research done before that, we know that bringing people together of all ages is the one of the best ways to combat ageism. So that's just a really simple way. I think also, when you're in spaces where there maybe isn't as much diversity when it comes to age, maybe you could just say that. You could say, like, wow, I wonder if we could get, some older people in this space, or some younger people in this space, or some folks who, are somewhere in the middle, where we're missing like this demographic when it comes to this age group. And just say, why aren't they here? Question, why aren't they here? And then say, like, maybe we should bring them along in this conversation, because it's so important. Beyond that, you can always hire old school. We give workshops, a part of the site that I didn't talk about. When we first found those 74 resources, we realized, oh, there's some things missing here. So a part of the work at Old School that we do is to create workshops that are DIY. So it's do it yourself. We give you the slides, we give you the script, we give you a little bit of a pep talk, and we say, thank you, thank you, thank you for doing this work. And you can, present wherever you want. If you don't like presenting, if it's not your thing, we can come in and do it for you, if you'd like. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. I'm sure there's a lot more answers. If there's no other questions, I can keep going, but I do just want to be conscious of time.
No, that was perfect. And I think David Wilson actually just posed a question in the chat as well. David, would you like to unmute?
Yeah, sure, Ryan, and hi, nice to see you. Can you elaborate how you would describe the benefits and actually what it means to go and sit at somebody else's table?
Yeah, thank you, David. Yeah, I thank you for asking me to elaborate on this, because it's definitely a metaphor that I think is I'm using for a really important idea. So when I talk about sitting at someone else's table, I'm mostly speaking about the fact that growing up, as a white kid in New Jersey, I had a lot of privileges growing up. I, was sort of raised into a culture where I didn't necessarily see anyone else's table, to be honest. I didn't see the variety of the world around me in terms of who had power around me. It was mostly just I was just I I didn't see that there were that I didn't see my power is what I should say. I'm struggling to find the word, but I didn't see my power. I didn't understand sort of the white supremacist world that I had been raised in. I didn't understand the fact that there was a world around me that was disabling to so many people. I didn't understand the youth supremacy that was around me either. I didn't understand a lot. So as I grew older and I started to seek out, these different tables. Now I just want to keep on using that metaphor, but as I sought out new communities, let's say different communities, I started to learn so much about myself and my identity, and it kind of became a feedback loop where the more I learned about my identity, I was able to show up for other people, for other communities of folks who didn't, we didn't share identities. We didn't look the same. But I was able to show up and just be in those spaces and be really um, receptive, to be a sponge. I remember the thought that's coming to mind, and I don't share this often, but when I first started getting into this work, I was living in Brooklyn, New York, and I was it was at a time where I hadn't gone to school for gerontology yet, but I knew that I wanted to have older people in my life. Um, I realized this because when I did spend time with older people, it just helped my mental health so much to be around them and to connect with them. And I really wanted to connect with people in my community. And I went to the local senior center and I basically just showed up and I said, "Hey, I'm here. I'd love to volunteer. I'd love to, see what's going on here. How can I be of help?" And they basically just brought me in and had me sit down and they were playing steel drums. It was a steel drum class and they just had me participate. That's what they did. They didn't need me to do anything else other than to just be there. And I really loved that experience so much. Um, it really brought an understanding of what it means to just show up and enjoy myself. It didn't take any other effort other than that. And I'll just rewind a little and say that ageism, I think, was behind that motive for me to go there. And ageism was also, in a lot of ways, behind me wanting to learn gerontology and to understand gerontology and go to school for it. And it's what I like to call benevolent ageism. So as a younger person in my early 20s, I thought, oh, I want to help older people. It's really, it's like, I was kind of like a martyr, to be honest, when it came to helping older people. And I look back now and I understand, wow, I was really coming from a place of youth supremacy. I was really coming from a place where I was centering youth. I was centering my youth as so important for these folks in my life, but it wasn't necessarily. I unlearned that pretty quickly after my first Gero class, and I learned about ageism. I hope that answers your question a little bit. Great.
Well, thank you very much again, Ryan. And I also wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about the language of ageism. So, of course, language carries and conveys meaning, which feeds assumptions that can lead to the development of stereotypes and discrimination. But how would you say language influences the way we understand aging?
I love this question too. So language, I think, is everything, when it comes to talking about anything. Obviously, language really shapes our world in so many different ways. And when it comes to aging, you know, outside of this space, for the most part, outside of the aging world, you know, age is talked about in a really specific way, you know, and if it's talked about at all, you know. So when we only talk about aging and age, and I'm talking mostly about dominant culture here, when we talk about aging and age in a really specific way, it doesn't leave room for nuance. It doesn't leave room for our own unique experiences when it comes to this topic. You know, aging, I like to say, you know, I've hopefully this thing of you've seen 180-year-old, you've seen 180-year-old, the geriatrician that said that. I like to say, yeah, there's as many different ways to age as there are people aging, which obviously is limitless as we move along this path. And so a really good example of this is when I was first presenting workshops. It was before COVID. It was around the time that a few months before we launched Old School, I started giving workshops, and one of the main activities in the workshop was to have people write down on pieces of paper every word that they could come up with having to do with age and aging for about 5 minutes. So I'd have, you know, everyone in the room write their words on a piece of paper, and then we would put the papers in a hat, and then each person would pick one and read someone else's list. It was a very interesting activity because, you know, there were a lot of chuckles, but there was a lot of also some of the lists or parts of the lists were quite heavy. So it was a really interesting activity just to see, you know, the commonalities, but also the differences for everyone's list. And so at the beginning of COVID, you know, when we were all looking for stuff to do, part of that for me was looking at these lists. I had about 100. And at that point, I actually did have some lists from workshops on Zoom that I had copied down. And I put together all of these lists into a word cloud. So every word that showed up on the list, I put into a word cloud to see what words were used the most. And the two words that popped out to me out of all these lists were death and wisdom. By far, those were the two words that were used the most on these lists. And I use that example because I think it's also important to say that language can be really limiting when it comes to talking about age and aging, just because it is such it's such a broad experience for all of us that it can become sort of very binary, as you can see from death and wisdom. It can become very binary, and it doesn't allow for more of the unique different ways of talking about it. And so I'm really excited to see that change, though. You know, I have in the years that I've been doing this work, I have seen that change, and I'm excited for it to change more, for language around this to change more.
Thanks so much, Ryan. And going back to the chat, I see Eileen, you posed a question. May I please ask you to unmute?
Thank you very much, Ryan, for a very interesting conversation. I just asked a question. The name of your organization, Old School. When I heard old school, immediately comes to me with the definition of old fashioned. Has that ever come up as an issue for you?
Well, thank you so much for asking about that. It's not, the name is not my idea. It was the idea of my colleagues, Kyrie and Ashton. So it's definitely meant to, it's meant as sort of a play on words in a few different senses. So it is meant to use that connotation of old fashioned, and to say, you know, in one way, what's wrong with old fashioned? You know, there's nothing wrong with being old fashioned. There's nothing wrong with continuing to uplift, you know, the way that things have been done. I think it's also, we use school because we do see ourselves as, you know, such an important educational resource. That's really what we are designed to do, is to teach people about ageism through the amazing resources that other people have created. We've created some ourselves, but it's really it's a play on words, to sort of combine those two ideas, and just to, you know, to also question, you know, what does it mean to be old? You know, how do we usually use that word? And, you know, we're not afraid to use that word, is what I'll say. We're not afraid to use the word old, when it comes to this work, or talking about ourselves or anything.
Well, thanks, Eileen, and thank you very much, Ryan. Can I please next ask Mr. Ken Kun to come forward to pose your question?
Well, I'll just leave it as that. I think many communities and are working, you know, city councils, et cetera, are working on combating ageism, but it seems TV, media, advertising constantly focuses in on different ages, and certainly makes the ageism apparent easily. So any ideas on that, Ryan?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a place where I see ageism oftentimes. I mean, it's the easiest place to see it because it's everywhere. I do feel like things are changing. There were the five newscasters from New York One, who fought a lawsuit against their employer for firing them. You know, newscasters who are fired way too early, female newscasters who are fired way too early because of their aging, when men get to stay on the air. There was a fascinating conversation around that here in Canada last year, around a woman who, yeah, was fired, and she fought back, you know. Maybe David can put the name of the woman in the chat. Thank you. You know, I think there are people fighting back. I think specifically when it comes to advertising, I think it's, you know, where we put our money, you know, will really change things. I think giving feedback, you know, writing folks and saying, this is not okay. I would like to say that there's some campaign that you could sign up to be able to make this change. I don't necessarily know of any right now off the top of my head that I can point to, that I know of, that are doing this specific work. But I think there's so much potential here for folks to come together and say, like, no, this is not okay. Unfortunately, you know, oftentimes advertising, they're going to do what they want to do. And it's not necessarily about getting pushback. It's more about what makes them money. So I don't know how much we can affect in that sense, but I also would just encourage you to seek out media that is anti-ageist, and it exists. You know, it's out there. It's maybe a little bit harder to find, but there are some great resources when it comes to getting news and getting content that isn't necessarily so ageist as the more popular ones.
Thanks so much, Ryan. And how about ageism and age discrimination in the care and service delivery of older adults? So in this context, what role does person-centered care for older adults play in dismantling ageism?
I think this is such an important topic. And I think there's something about person-centered care that has really changed the conversation around this. And it is inherently, I think, an anti-ageist idea that, you know, not all older people are the same. You know, they don't all want the same care. That's a very important point. I also think that there's room to grow in that. And this is, you know, this is me being a big dreamer. But I do think that there's something a bit isolating about person-centered care when it comes to just talking about the person being the person receiving the services. So when we take a step back and we look at person-centered care in the context of, the carers, care partners are people too. Administration, they're people too. Families are also people, so we can look at, when we look at person-centered care in the context of community and the fact that, we are all part of a community that is aging, it really, I think, allows for anti-ageism to flourish, and it rids us of the ageism that is inherent in this top-down approach to elder care, where we don't necessarily think about how to age in community. I think it's great that people now have single rooms. It wasn't like that for a long time when we're talking about nursing homes and assisted living facilities and congregate settings like that. But I think it's also important to think about, like, how do we have community, especially in around what happened with COVID. How do we create and continue to have community? And I was at a in Quebec, they're called CHSLDs, but it's essentially what you would call a nursing home in the States. I was at one recently, and I could just tell, and they confirmed this this suspicion that I had later on in the event that I was at. But I could just tell by the attention of the volunteers, the attention of the workers there, the attention even of the residents helping out other residents. I could tell that there was a culture of care amongst everyone, not just, it wasn't this top-down approach. It was, it felt like a home. It felt like when I walked in, it felt like I was walking into a home. Unfortunately, not enough CHSLDs and not enough nursing homes and not enough congregate living facilities are like that.
Well, thanks so much, Ryan. And I see in the chat, Catherine Klein actually posed a question related to the clearinghouse. Catherine, can I please ask you to unmute and pose your question, please?
Sure. Ryan, you mentioned colleagues, and I think many in this gathering know Ashton White, but I don't know who the second person is, and maybe you could introduce a little bit about both of them.
Yes, thank you so much. So Ashton Applewhite wrote This Chair Rocks. Thank you so much for holding that up, Catherine. It's her fantastic book, and I can see you have an original.
Oh.
So it was reprinted. It has a different cover now. But yeah, she started off just writing, blogging about aging and what it was like for older people to not retire, to avoid retirement. That's how it started. And she soon discovered that ageism was really affecting her sense of her own aging. And she decided to do something about it. And actually, I saw her speak 10 years ago when I was in school for gerontology. It was during my first Gero 101 class. And I went out to see her speak, and she really changed so much of my thinking at that time. And then since then, so we started working together. She really encouraged me to start doing workshops. And she's been a huge part of helping me to do this work and encouraging me to continue to do this work. And so it was her idea. The clearinghouse was her idea because she really, wanted to be able to point somewhere for people to go to really, connect with the important work that so many different people and organizations are doing. And then Kyrie is the person actually who Ashton first contacted about putting together this list of resources, not realizing what it would snowball into. And Kyrie's background is in psychiatry or psychology. And she's a Jungian, comes from a Jungian background, and is just very, and also comes from a lot of work around dementia care as well. That's actually what got her into this work, was interning at a memory care unit, and just realizing, it really shocked her into understanding all the preconceptions that she had about, what it is to work with this population of folks with different cognitive abilities. And so the three of us, put our heads together and started to create this list. And like I said, it snowballed. We're really lucky in the sense that we get to really to work together, across Zoom. We were on Zoom before COVID, working together, because Kyrie was living in San Francisco. I was living in Europe for a time. Ashton's in Brooklyn. So we're all, we're kind of spread out, but we love working together on this project, and it's really been incredible to see, so much change over the years that we've been working together in our lives, in our personal lives, but also in our professional lives as well.
Well, thank you very much. And as a crystal ball question, Ryan, let's discuss how we can move forward from here. So can you speak to us a little about how we all can change the way we think, feel, and act towards age and ageism?
Absolutely. So the first thing is to definitely scroll back up to Catherine's link for the WHO's Global Report on Ageism. I think it's such an important campaign and report that they've put together. And it really goes to show you, if you read it, or if you have read it, that there's a lot of instances where they say, there needs to be more research into this. So I think that's so important to just get an understanding of where we're at. I think that I also, that's kind of big level, but then on a smaller level, I just invite people to think about, what it means to have an age. It's very simple. What does it mean for you yourself to have an age? What does it mean for you to be aging? And kind of let that inform the way that you interact with the world around you, with your friends. I'd start to think about seriously what you mean when you say old, or when you say young, or you can ask other people, if they're saying an ageist compliment, you look great for your age, or something like that. You can just say, well, what do you mean by that? Or can I just look great? Does it have to be about my age? I think mostly just asking questions can be really helpful when it comes to interacting with ageism. And then again, to go back to really questioning, different ages in the space, and paying attention to the different ages that are at the table, that are in the spaces. Question like what are the ages of the people making the decision, and other identity factors too. I really believe that undoing ageism is so much a part of undoing other isms, and undoing other isms in turn will definitely help undo ageism, especially when it comes to racism. I think it's so important for white people who are in the aging field to really understand what that means. I think it has huge connotations when we're talking about life expectancy, when we're talking about who has the mic, who has the privilege to show up and to really make it a point to understand how white supremacy finds itself in so many different spaces.
Well, thank you very much. And slowly coming close to the hour, I do just want to highlight that this, of course, Global Cafe is a very important topic on ageism and how powerful conversations can really be. So thank you, Ryan, for the great discussions that were brought about. And thank you, everyone, for joining. But just before going off to your key takeaways from you, Ryan, I would also like to introduce our next week's topic and speaker as well. So next week, we have the opportunity to listen to key expert Dr. Clarfield on the challenges of aging and low and middle income countries. So please join in. It's going to be a great discussion next week as well. And back to you, Ryan. What are some of the key takeaways today for you and that you would like to share with us all?
Sure. So I'm going to put our contact page in the chat, and that's because that's where you can get the link to office hours. I would love, if anything in this conversation that we had today made you interested in knowing more, learning more, or saying more, we would love for you to show up. It's, like I said, it's very casual, but I think the takeaway, I didn't mention at all this whole time my identity as a trans person. But I do want to say that I do think it's really special and important that I'm here talking as a trans person. It's special to me that IFA had me here. Because I think, when we're talking about identity, it can get really political really fast, but it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be contentious. It doesn't have to be, and specifically when we're talking about ageism, it doesn't have to be contentious. It can just be, we can just bring our different experiences to the conversation, and to just be honest with, what we are going through. Like I said, we all have different experiences of aging. So we're going to all have different experiences of ageism. And I think that's so important to just really talk about how we are each showing up to this conversation in a way that allows vulnerability. I think that's really important when we're talking about bias, unconscious and conscious bias, and really being inspired by other people and the ways that they're able to really to be in these spaces. I'm constantly inspired in office hours by who shows up and how we have these conversations, and the strength that people have in being able to connect on such a deep level, again, about something that's not talked about enough. So I am really, really grateful that I was able to be here today and that we could explore this topic together.
No, and likewise, I think I'm very grateful to have everyone here and for a great discussion. And again, just thank you very much to everyone who joined, and a special thank you to the incredible people working at the IFA who support this, but also every Global Cafe, especially Luana. Thank you very much. I hope to see everyone next Friday, and wishing everyone a great rest of your day. Take care, everyone.